It's an honor and a pleasure this morning to welcome the leadership from the European Leadership Network, known as ELNET, here to Valley Beth Shalom. ELNET was co-founded by Larry Hochberg, who is here with us today, and Knut Becker in 2007 to become the APAC of Europe. As Israel's largest trade and innovation partner, Europe is also critical to Israel's security. European defense platforms are essential to Israel's qualitative military edge, including German-made submarines key to Israel's strategic deterrence. Europe, the world's largest democratic bloc, dominates the United Nations Security Council and key global institutions that impact Israel. ELNET US is a 501c3 that supports the work of ELNET's offices in 6 major European capitals in Israel, and we are proud that we have relationship here at VBS with so many of its board members and supporters, including Larry Hochberg, our close friend Tom Flesch, our very own Janice Kaminer-Resnick, Ben Resnick, Scott Sandler. Did I forget anybody, Larry? I'm doing fine, thank you. And Barry Wolf, thank you very much. And Barry Wolf, I knew Barry Wolf, that was gonna be my last one. Okay, it is an honor to welcome here today the Right Honorable Joan Ryan. Ryan was a member of Parliament of the United Kingdom for 17 years and served in the government of Prime Minister Tony Blair. She has served as the UK's special representative to Cyprus and was appointed to the Privy Council by Her Majesty the Queen. Ryan famously resigned from the Labour Party in 2019 to protest its culture of anti-Semitism under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. She is now Executive Director of ELNET's UK office, which opened in London in 2021. It's also a great honor to welcome back to Los Angeles and welcome back here to VBS, Ambassador David Siegel. Ambassador Siegel was Chief of Staff to 3 Israeli ambassadors to the United States and the Consul General of Israel to the Pacific Southwest region here in LA. Among other senior Israeli diplomatic positions in his career. During his tenure in LA, David developed deep ties to the VBS community. He is president of ELNET US, a 501c3 that supports the global work of ELNET, and he is based in New York. We welcome both the Right Honorable Joan Ryan and Ambassador David Siegel to the Bima. Thank you for being here. So let's begin with this very basic, simple question. How would you describe Jewish life in Europe today?
So, you want to start?
Well, I'm not Jewish, so I can't describe it from the point of view of a Jewish person. But talking to the community and knowing them well and seeing what goes on, I think life is very difficult for the Jewish community. I think they feel very, very vulnerable. I think they are scared for their children. Things have happened on the streets, there's abuse. They say to their children, if you're wearing a Star of David, put it inside your clothes, or simply don't wear it in case somebody sees it. A lot of the Jewish children are now in Jewish schools, and that's not because their parents want to segregate them. It's because they're frightened for them and for the abuse they will receive at school, and they're very fearful for their children on social media. They don't want their children to grow up knowing abuse like that and feeling that their identity is constantly questioned and disapproved of. And so I think that makes life very, very difficult for them. And they are a close community and there's strength in that. But they shouldn't have to hold together for safety. They should be holding together simply because they are together and they want to.
Ambassador Siegel, can you describe the responsibility of ELNET and why it was needed in the first place?
Yes, thank First of all, Rabbi, thank you very much for hosting us, and it's a great honor to be back at Valley Bet Shalom. When I became Consul General in 2011, my first meeting was in this building with the rabbinical, the entire network of VBS to introduce me to the Jewish community. So I feel very, very much at home, and thank you for that. Look, we have a large responsibility, and I also want to relate to the first question as well. You know, anti-Semitism is not only a European experience, it's very much a European experience, it's also an American experience, unfortunately. And if you look at poll after poll after poll over the last 6-7 years, you see that 6 in 10 American Jews are also hiding their Jewish identity. And Jewish kids, I mean, my oldest daughter went to Columbia, it's not going to be repeated. My youngest is going to Vanderbilt in the South. And I think that's the story of the Jewish community. And we need to fight back. The importance of ELNET, and especially in a week like this week and this day, with this emotional roller coaster of the Bibas family and the children that were so brutally murdered, and the joy of the 6 release hostages today. And if you zoom out and you look at the Middle East right now, and Iran is racing towards a nuclear bomb, Syria has just been toppled, Turkey is coming as the next great threat, Hamas isn't done yet, Hezbollah is still there, the West Bank is literally exploding, and there was a miracle this week that those 4 buses didn't explode with passengers on them. You realize that so much is in motion right now in the world, and Israel is so small and is dealing with so much that we need allies everywhere, not just here. And we're very good at identifying our enemies. We sometimes are less adept at identifying our friends, cultivating them, and we have many, many friends in important parts of the world. And Europe is critical to Israel. It's critical economically. It's critical diplomatically. The future of AI, Israel's not there. I hate to tell you, Israel's a startup nation, but there are areas where we need to catch up, especially after this war. And we need those markets, we need those partners. These are democracies. And frankly, Europe needs Israel just as much, because with the threat of Russia, the threat of Iran, Islamic extremism within, they need Israel just as much as Israel needs them. So this is a great partnership that needs to be cultivated.
Following October 7th, Barry Weiss famously said that the vacation from Jewish history is over. Now looking back, though, we can see that there were lots of indicators leading up to October 7th that vacation would end soon, and one of them was certainly Jeremy Corbyn's rise to power in England. Mm-hmm. How do you describe or how do you make sense of it? Because here we're trying to make sense of it now. How do you make sense that Jeremy Corbyn unlocked a culture of Jew hatred that seemingly was right beneath the surface for many, many years? And he acutely understood how to harness that energy and that rage and that hate and how to make it socially acceptable again. And how do we make sure, moving forward, that that hate is put back in the box, even though we'll never be able to unsee what we've seen? How do we make it socially unacceptable again to be an anti-Semite?
Don't need to move it. I should say thank you for having me here today.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's 6 years ago this month that I left the Labour Party. And I left after 40 years because Jeremy Corbyn wasn't just allowing a crisis of anti-Semitism to engulf the Labour Party, he was leading it. And for me, I just couldn't stand by and see that happen and not speak out, because everything I believed in, every reason why I was in the Labour Party, why I wanted to be involved in politics, was now being basically overturned, trashed, and replacing it was the kind of racism that I'd always stood against. For Jeremy Corbyn, he absolutely believes that he isn't an anti-Semite. He believes that it's not anti-Semitic to say you're an anti-Zionist. He believes Zionism is a colonialization and that it's oppressing, Israel is oppressing the Palestinians. And his beliefs have seeped into the rest of society. And we kind of didn't know that until after October the 7th. What we saw happen was the hard left politics, which has long held these beliefs. It's a symbol of their politics to oppose Israel. Anyone involved in hard left politics, they recognise each other through being able to say, I'm a member of Palestine Solidarity, I'm a member of Palestine Action, I'm a member of Labour Friends of Palestine in the Middle East, or Conservative Friends of Palestine who are not as aggressive about it, but they are still, you could never say they were pro-Israel. These politics have been there for a very long time, and we tolerated them when we clearly should not have done. We saw them as kind of cranks on the margins of our political party. We didn't see them as someone biding their time, but when they got the opportunity through the processes of the Labour Party being changed, they grabbed the leadership. And what we saw then was the critical nature of leadership. And that's one of the lessons we have to learn, that leadership is everything. And when they got control of the party as an organisation, then they allowed the anti-Semitism free rein, always denying that that's what it was. Some of us stood aside from that and spoke out. And when I say stood aside, I mean resigned from the party. And yes, you know that that means you're unlikely to get elected again. I wasn't going to stand as an independent. I know there's little point in our system. But I did want to speak out. And I think we didn't end it, the few of us who stepped away. All we did was draw back a curtain and show the British people how toxic these politics were. And remember, in 2017 election, he came within 6 seats of being able to form a coalition with the SNP, who were equally anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, and he would have been the Prime Minister of the UK, an anti-Semite in number 10. It's unthinkable. If we'd have stayed in the party and said what we had to say and taken to the media 24/7 to say it, he would have expelled us. We weren't going to let him have that weapon. The British people defeated him. There were other issues, such as Brexit, but people were saying, we can't vote for that man. So I think that gives me hope. However, the Labour Party has changed. Keir Starmer is not Jeremy Corbyn. He doesn't do everything we'd like him to do. I don't suppose you've found a politician or a political party that does. And he's done some things we're not happy about. But the bottom line is, when push has come to shove, he's been a strategic ally to Israel. When the missiles have come over, it's the UK, France, US, and Israel who have fought together, defended Israel together, stood shoulder to shoulder. And for me, that's the bottom line. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn would have done that for 1 minute. He might have been helping the other side. He was a regular performer on Press TV, the broadcaster of a fascist theocracy. He was a regular supporter of Russia. I'm sure he'd be very pleased to think that Russia and America might have an alliance. I don't think they will. Now, we thought we were back on the road to some real moral compass with Keir Starmer. And I think the Labour Party is. But what we've seen is the legacy of Jeremy Corbyn, and that legacy is pernicious. And what we've seen is that legacy of anti-Semitism had seeped into the wider society. He had normalised it, and now we see it in full flow, marching down our streets week after week, abusing the Jewish population and anybody who supports them, denying what has happened, denying what happened to the women on October the 7th, saying there isn't enough evidence for that. Well, I think we all saw those girls and those women and what happened. What kind of evidence do people really want? They don't want evidence that they're being anti-Semitic. Keir Starmer has said, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's expelled from the party. He's over there now. And so are a lot of the hard left. But they're organising on campus. They're organising in their own political groupings. They've not gone away. And that's another lesson we have to learn, that you can never, ever stop being vigilant on these matters. You need to stand up to anti-Semitism the first time it happens. And I think the other lesson is for our members of Parliament, many of them who we meet with week in, week out, we talk to them. We do an awful lot of face-to-face meetings. We have good access to the Foreign Office, to the Prime Minister, to government. We make the case all the time. We take delegations to Israel. A lot of the new MPs are very good when you talk to them face-to-face, but they are not standing up publicly in Parliament and defending Israel. They're not doing that. And that's wrong. We need to demand so much more of our elected representatives. Their job is to show leadership, and I don't believe they're doing that. And I think there's never been a more critical time for the work that we do than now.
Let me ask you one more question, and then I'll wrap up with a final question to David. This past week, we saw the event of the return of the Bibis children in coffins. We saw a ceremony that I thought would bring complete moral clarity for the world in terms of what it is that they're watching in this war, right? This isn't a war about colonialism or nuance. This is a war about good and evil. This is a war about people who bring their children out to enjoy the festivities of a presentation of dead children and a culture and a state that welcomes those children home in coffins with dignity and decency. But that message didn't get through to Europe because the BBC is perhaps one of the greatest instruments of Jew hatred that the world has ever known. So how do we combat a state-run media like the BBC, where even were we to get all of the MPs of England to understand the Jewish narrative and the importance and significant role of the state of Israel in the world and the just and right mission of the Jewish state, how would we begin to combat the messaging of the BBC?
Well, Rabbi, the BBC is not a state-run media, but it is a public sector media, which means it's financed by a tax that we all pay if we have a television called a TV license, and we pay the tax to government, and government makes the funding available to the BBC. But they have a board, and that board is pretty independent. We have taken members of that board to Israel on delegation. I think the BBC, like everything else, the BBC is putting itself at severe risk of not continuing as a public sector broadcaster. And it's hard to know whether it could survive as a commercial entity. And it's a great shame because the BBC does some fantastic work. Some of their documentaries, some of their films, some of their programming is really, really excellent. And they've had a good reputation in the past for educational materials for schools. And you're right, they've destroyed that reputation. But they're having a huge influence, and a lot of people watch the BBC News, if nothing else. How do you turn back a tide of hate? I think with the BBC, we have to continue to always stand up every time we see what they're doing. We have to complain to government, we have to make friends with the culture secretary. We have to make it really difficult for anybody to say, it's okay, this is fair, we're going to carry on funding them. We've got to make the life of those who can influence the BBC hell of itself if they don't stand up to this. But beyond that, we've got to show that the BBC is indoctrinating people, and it's out of touch, it's not truthful. And I think we do that by, certainly with our elected representatives, they have to know there's no neutral ground here. You cannot say you're a friend of Israel if you are keeping your head down during this time. You cannot say you are a good representative if you're not willing to speak out. And for all the people who want to ignore what Iran is doing, don't tell us to decolonize the curriculum. The greatest decolonization movement of the 20th century is Zionism. Don't tell us you're a anti-racist if you're not going to speak out about what's happened on October the 7th. But I think there is a great deal of hope as well. Because I know, for instance, two of the things I'd tell you about from Keir Starmer. And I know people, you know, worry that the Labour Party is equivocal around Israel. And that's why I say there are things they've done we don't like refunding, you know, restoring the funding to UNRWA, their acceptance of the ICC and the ICJ positions, and of course the arms embargoes on the 30 licenses. There are 300 others, and it was a symbolic act, but it was the wrong act. And we protest them, we talk to them about them. As I say, they're a strategic ally and they're there when Israel needs to be defended. But there's two other things he's done lately that gives me some hope, and hope that we are making an impact. One is, he was asked at the dispatch box in Prime Minister's questions by some other member why, you know, what he thinks about genocide, Israel to Palestinians. And he said, and he's asked, did you understand the definition of genocide? And he said, I understand the definition of genocide very well. I'm paraphrasing, it was a longer thing. I understand the definition of genocide very well, he said, and I'm not talking about genocide in relation to Israel. And he said, and if you want to talk about genocide in that context, let's start with October the 7th. Now, that gives me hope, because he has said anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and he's said that about that question of genocide. So I think that gives us some insight into where he is and his integrity on this matter. And the other thing he's done now, he's asked for the Education Secretary to look at a policy of making Holocaust studies core curriculum for schools throughout the school career of a child. And I think it's through these means that we turn back this tide of hate. Make it clear that MPs have to show leadership, always stand up to anti-Semitism immediately, and know that you have friends. And I don't do what I do or did what I did as a favour to somebody. I do it because of what I believe, and because I believe that we all want to live in a decent world, and we're going to have to stand up for that. And I no more want my children and grandchildren to live in a world where people are hating and abusing Jewish people, which will spread then to other communities. We know the canary in the mine. We know nobody is immune at the end of the day, and we have to stand together, and we have to understand how this happens. And I used to work for the War Museum in the 80s, and I interviewed Holocaust survivors, and that taught me just where anti-Semitism can lead to, how serious it is. And I know that anti-Zionism is just the latest iteration of that hatred. So everything we do, every letter you write, every time you speak to a member of Congress or the Senate, every time you speak up in the face of this scourge, this crisis of anti-Semitism, every time we do the work that we do, every person we take to Israel, every representative, we are turning back that tide of hate, and we are making that difference, and we can only do it together. We are stronger together than we'll ever be alone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David, in my humble opinion, you are one of our most effective, articulate consul generals while you were here in Los Angeles. You built bridges with Jewish communities all throughout the neighborhoods of LA, and you spoke beautifully on behalf of the State of Israel, explaining what was going on there, both for our benefit and her benefit as well. If there is a message about what is happening today, both in Europe and in Israel, that you think that we don't fully understand at this point, I would love for you to have a moment to speak to the congregation and relay that message.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you again. I think my first message is Joan. You just heard what it feels like, what the experience is that I experience and we experience every day working with pro-Israel and decent politicians throughout Europe. So Joan is representing the United Kingdom, but when I look at Europe, and first of all, I see a continent very close to Israel geographically. I grew up in Haifa. 20 minutes away from my home in Haifa is Cyprus by light aircraft. Cyprus is Europe. There's a reason why Hezbollah, before Mr. Nasrallah met his creator, Nasrallah threatened Cyprus because Cyprus was becoming the alternative Air Force base for the Israeli Air Force. So he was threatening Cyprus because he saw how close and intimate the strategic relationship was between Israel and Cyprus and Greece and beyond. There were teams going to Cyprus and Greece to find alternative ports for Israel in the event of war. So if Haifa, the port of Haifa shut down, or Ashdod shut down, we would be using the Cyprus port or the Greek ports. So you realize in this business that we're in, that Israel needs these relationships and that we have many, many friends out there. We typically think of the big countries, UK, France, Germany. By the way, Germany is in elections tomorrow. They're going to be historic elections. Germany is in economic crisis. Germany looks to Israel, not only as a supplier of strategic submarines that you mentioned, but also they purchased the Arrow 3 missile defense system from Israel, the largest defense export in Israel's history, and that's only the beginning. And you realize that these are important relationships, and we need to have a network, and we need to have funding for this network so that we can bring. Joan came to Israel with one of the pro-Israel organizations, your first time in Israel. We need to bring these legislators to Israel because ultimately they become leaders. They're already leaders. They can become prime ministers and ministers, and they make decisions that are very, very important. Let me give you just 2 or 3 examples about why it's important. And by the way, we brought 30 delegations to Israel since October 7th, 400 legislators, all to the south, some to the north, all to the south. The IDF receives them, probably more than any other organization in the world. They're not doing it for Europe. They're doing it for Israel. They're doing it for Israel's national security because they understand how important these relationships are. So when Iran attacked Israel last year, if you remember, with drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, the first time, the British, the French, the Americans, and the Israelis, together with some of the Abraham Accord countries, even Cyprus was involved because the British aircraft took off from their air bases in Cyprus. to defend Israel, together with General Kurilla from the Pentagon and the whole CENTCOM process. And 99% of those rockets, missiles, and drones were taken out of the sky by this international coalition. If you asked me 2 years ago, would European armed forces be in the air side by side with Israeli pilots shooting down Iranian rockets? I think you were crazy. But the world is such where that coalition is becoming a reality. And then again, we saw in November that the French and the British and the Israelis and the Americans and others were trying to shoot down those 180 plus ballistic missiles that Iran fired at Israel. By the way, that was a very significant attack, more than we can talk about publicly. Very, very significant and dangerous attack. And if you ask the head of the Israeli Air Force who was the most helpful to Israel after the United States in those hours, he will tell you it was the French Air Force. So when you look at this and you realize how important this is and how important it's going to be for the future as well, especially as Israel faces these 7, 8, 9 fronts that are constantly changing, this is an alliance that matters. It's an alliance that we all need to be in together. And I'm also frequently asked, well, why don't the Europeans do it? Why don't they support ELNET? Why are you coming to us here in America? And I want to tell you something. The days of there and here are long gone. We're all in this together. Every Jewish kid on a college campus is under threat, whether he's in London or in New York or at UCLA in Los Angeles. So we're all in this together, and we need to fight this together. I think the good news is we have friends out there. We really have friends out there. And I didn't even mention Central Europe, Eastern Europe, those countries one by one that are facing Russia, and behind Russia facing Iran, and behind Iran facing China. These are countries that are natural allies to the state of Israel, despite the history, and the history is very complicated. But these are the countries that will be future allies of Israel, and ELNET is really the only organization able to do all of this together, to go to Brussels, to go to NATO, to go to the EU, to go to all of these individual countries, to bring these delegations to Israel, to go to the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Defense Minister, the head of Mossad, the head of Shin Bet, the head of IDF, to bring them in. We even took delegations into Gaza, the only organization in the world that was able to embed military officials from Europe or from anywhere in the world in Gaza for hours with Israeli special forces all the way down to the border with Egypt, and to show them the underground, to show them the tunnels, to have them go back home, to have them talk about it in Europe, is ELNET. So that's the importance of this, and I think we should all understand that it's a global coalition that we need to cultivate for the future safety and security of not just the Jewish people, but the state of Israel. For many years to come.
I want to thank you both. I want to thank you both for visiting us here at VBS, and let you know that we have tremendous faith in the leadership of the British people in Europe and in you in particular. Throughout our history, it has been brave British people that have stepped forward, like Lord Balfour, like Winston Churchill, that have turned the dark tide away and been a good friend to the Jewish people. And you are no different. Okay. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank you, David. I want to thank you, David, and assure you always have friends here. You're always welcome to come back to visit us here at VBS. And ELNET has friends here at VBS, and we will always be glad to welcome you back.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.